Sometimes a man believes a compliment is just a polite sentence, a verbal gesture, something casually released into the air to see if it lands. But Machiavellian thinking never treats it so lightly. To him, a compliment is leverage, a quiet instrument of influence that opens doors even persistence cannot force. And when it comes to a woman, a properly delivered compliment can dissolve even the most subtle emotional resistance. Because it's never about the words alone. It's about the emotional state you create while saying them. You don't praise her appearance, you acknowledge the way she exists. You don't flatter her form. You highlight the way she becomes singular in the world. A compliment is not description, it is suggestion, emotional direction. That is why Machiavellian compliments are never obvious, needy, or common. They are measured, intentional, precise. They settle in her mind, they surface when she least expects them. They make her remember you even when she tries not to. Smile without fully understanding why. Because the human mind responds to selective attention. If you compliment what everyone else compliments, you blend into the background. But when you recognize what no one else notices, you separate yourself instantly. You become the man who truly sees her. And the first compliment that truly disarms a woman has nothing to do with how she looks. It touches a quality she hides or undervalues. Every woman carries a part of herself she believes goes unnoticed. A strength, a sensitivity, a quiet capability, an inner contradiction. When you are the first to name it, she feels as if you've read her without her revealing a word. And that awakens something powerful, assurance mixed with curiosity. Suddenly, you're no longer just another man. You become the one who understood her without explanation. The second Machiavellian compliment is never direct. It is implied. You don't say, "You're interesting." You say, "It's rare to meet someone who actually makes you think." You don't say, "You're beautiful." You say, "Why do you have that presence that draws attention without effort?" You offer a compliment that forces interpretation, that invites her to decode you, to wonder what exactly you noticed. And while she's trying to understand that, her mind quietly creates space for you. Every strategic compliment plants an internal question, and every internal question creates influence. When a woman thinks about you after the conversation, it's not because of what you said, but because of what you left unsaid. Machiavellian thinking understands that silence, when used correctly, is more persuasive than excess words. Then comes the compliment of contrast, the most impactful one. It blends light and shadow in a single observation. Something like, "You have a gentle energy, but it feels like there's real strength behind it." This kind of compliment touches a duality every woman carries, the softness she shows and the resilience she protects. When you recognize both, she feels balanced, seen, complete, and no one resists feeling fully recognized. There is also a Machiavellian compliment that works precisely because it doesn't sound like one. You observe calmly and say, "I'm intrigued by the way you think before you speak." It doesn't sound romantic, it doesn't sound suggestive, it doesn't sound needy, yet it reaches deeply because it reveals attention, quiet attention. Subtle compliments bypass defenses. They don't announce themselves, they enter gently. A woman can dismiss obvious flirting, but she cannot easily dismiss being understood without pressure. And one of the most powerful compliments is not about her directly, but about the effect she has on you. When you say, "With you, it's difficult not to enjoy this conversation," she doesn't hear a line. She feels impact. She senses that she shifted your emotional state, that she mattered in that moment. And when a woman feels she affects you, that she moves something within you, connection begins to form, even if she never verbalizes it. Machiavellian thinking has always understood this. Influence is not in what you say, but in what the other person feels while listening. And when a woman realizes she has that effect on you, a quiet bond forms. The most understated compliment of all requires no words, just timing, a pause, a glance held a fraction longer than usual, a calm expression, no exaggeration. That silence communicates recognition more clearly than speech. It says, "I notice you as you are." And that message is difficult to ignore. Machiavelli was never searching for elegant phrases, he was searching for emotional leverage. He understood that when a compliment is perfectly calibrated, it doesn't just soften, it leaves a mark. A woman may forget routine admiration, but she rarely forgets the man who recognized something in her that no one else acknowledged. That is the essence of strategic attraction. Not competing, not chasing, becoming irreplaceable. There is one final compliment Machiavelli considered especially potent. Not because it offends, but because it quietly bypasses emotional barriers a woman doesn't even realize she's built. It's the compliment that recognizes her emotional awareness. The part of her overlooked because others focus on the surface. When you say something as simple as, "You have a rare way of listening," like you're actually trying to understand, not just respond. She doesn't receive a sentence. She receives validation of a depth she thought no one noticed. B. A real compliment lands differently. It reaches a place most people never notice. A woman can live comfortably with her beauty, her charm, her physical presence. She already knows those things. The world reminds her every day. But when you recognize something deeper, something rarely acknowledged, that's when it touches her. Noticing her sensitivity, her patience, her intuition, her ability to read the room without speaking. That's what softens her, because it reaches a part of herself she quietly protects. Every time you name an internal quality others overlook, you draw her one step closer without effort. Machiavellian thinking understood this well. People open up to those who see beyond the surface. And every woman wears a mask. The strong one who still feels fear. The confident one who sometimes questions herself. The kind one who knows how to be distant. The independent one who, at times, wants to be cared for. When you acknowledge that contrast, when you say something like, "You have a calm presence, but it feels like there's a quiet intensity inside you that not everyone could understand," she feels deeply recognized, almost unsettled in a good way, because it means you've seen her the same way she only sees herself in moments of solitude. And when a man sees her like that, she can't help but think about him differently. Another powerful Machiavellian compliment doesn't focus on her past or her present, but on her potential. When you say, "It feels like you're meant for bigger things, even if you haven't fully stepped into them yet," you're not describing who she is. You're speaking to who she could become. That activates something powerful. It creates the feeling that, with you, she can expand. That you're not drawn to what she displays, but to what she keeps within. Women respond to men who point toward a future, not just the present moment. A future-focused compliment doesn't flatter. It inspires. It doesn't inflate the ego. It awakens ambition. And that leaves a lasting impression. Machiavellian insight also recognized that some compliments are strongest when they feel unplanned. When something slips out naturally, like, "I like the way your expression changes when you're focused," it doesn't feel calculated, it feels real. And authenticity always carries more weight than perfection. A woman may question a compliment that sounds rehearsed, but she rarely doubts an observation that seems spontaneous. The so-called accidental compliment works because it arrives when she isn't expecting praise at all. Then there's the compliment that appeals to her inner pride, not surface validation. The pride built through effort, resilience, growth, and hard choices. When you say, "I admire how you stay true to yourself in environments where others lose their balance," she feels that you value her character, not her appearance. That's rare. And rarity creates value. A woman responds to the man who recognizes her depth, not just her emotions. Because there's something few women openly admit. Her real beauty lives in her story, not her face. When you acknowledge what she's been strong enough to carry, she looks at you as if you've understood something others missed. There's also a subtle Machiavellian compliment that works through comparison without naming it. When you casually say, "With you, conversation just flows naturally," she doesn't hear a simple personality compliment. She senses an unspoken contrast. An exclusivity. You didn't tell her she's different, you made her feel it, and feeling always matters more than hearing. Another effective compliment speaks to her mystery. Even the most open women keep parts of themselves private. When you say, "There's something about you I can't fully figure out, and that's what draws me in," she doesn't hear praise, she hears intrigue. You're not the man who claims to understand her completely, you're the man who respects her depth. That activates curiosity and connection at the same time. And finally, there's the most powerful Machiavellian compliment of all. The one that doesn't elevate her, but confirms what she already believes deep down. When you say, "You have a presence that quietly changes the atmosphere," she doesn't question it. She already knows it's true. She just needed it reflected back. A strong compliment doesn't create a new idea. It reinforces one she's been carrying silently. It shows her that you see her clearly, without exaggeration, without performance. And that kind of recognition stays with her. She feel powerful and, at the same time, deeply connected to you. Machiavellian thinking understood that emotional influence isn't built through intensity, but through precision. Each of these compliments works because it touches a different inner string. Pride, mystery, vulnerability, potential, strength, intuition. And when a man can play several of those strings without sounding needy, without sounding fake, without sounding exaggerated, he becomes someone who lingers in her mind long after the conversation ends. In Machiavellian thinking, the key was never just to give a compliment, but to do it in a way that makes her feel gently exposed, in the best possible sense. That only happens when a compliment touches something she doesn't fully control. For example, when you say, "I like how your voice changes when you talk about something you care about," you're pointing to an involuntary detail, something she doesn't plan and can't hide. That kind of compliment affects her deeply because it shows you see more than you're expected to see. You notice details others overlook. You're paying attention to signals she may not even realize she gives off. It's a compliment that opens quiet doors in her mind because it doesn't praise what she tries to display. It praises what slips through naturally. And when a woman feels that a man sees her spontaneous essence, something inside her softens. There's another Machiavellian-style compliment that works almost like a spell, the compliment of intention. You don't talk about what she does, you talk about why you believe she does it. When you say, "I get the sense that when you make a decision, you've already decided long before, you're just waiting for the right moment," you're recognizing her inner process, her way of navigating the world. She feels affected because it seems like you're reading her on a level usually reserved for her most private thoughts. It makes her wonder how you noticed, and that question alone changes how she looks at you. You're no longer just another person. You become someone who understands the emotional logic behind her actions. Machiavellian thinking understood that power lives in what the other person feels might be revealed if they lower their guard. That's why there's a compliment that points directly at her vulnerability. It's simple, but strong. The way you're strong isn't loud, but it's impossible not to notice. That line works because it validates an inner struggle she rarely shows. It recognizes quiet effort that often goes unseen. It's not about looks or attitude, it's about resilience. And every woman has moments where she had to stay strong without anyone acknowledging it. When you see that, she feels something unexpected, relief. And that relief naturally turns into connection. There's another compliment that isn't used often, but one Machiavellian thinking would strongly support. A compliment about her emotional effect on you, without weakness, without dependence, just authenticity. You don't say, "I'm obsessed with you," or "I can't live without you." That would give away balance. Instead, you say something like, "It surprises me how easy it is to be around you. My mind settles a little." It doesn't sound desperate. It doesn't sound dramatic. It sounds genuine. And a woman responds deeply to the idea that her presence has a positive effect on someone who doesn't seem easily impressed. That compliment makes her feel valuable, not just attractive, but emotionally meaningful. Without saying it outright, it tells her she brings something rare, and that makes her feel irreplaceable. Another highly effective Machiavellian compliment is one that recognizes her sense of humor, not the joke itself, but how she uses it. When you say, "Your laugh shows up exactly when the room needs it," you're saying she doesn't just laugh. She has emotional awareness, an instinct for balance. That affects her because you're seeing her social intelligence, her ability to shift the atmosphere without effort. You're not calling her laugh cute, you're recognizing it as something that changes energy. That distinction is subtle but powerful. Machiavellian thinking also understood that some women respond deeply to compliments that touch their independence. But the key is never saying, "You're independent." That sounds flat and predictable. The real compliment sounds more like, "I don't know if you realize it, but you have a presence that doesn't ask for permission." That line works because it doesn't describe what she does. It describes what she projects. It frames her as strong without needing to prove anything. And strong women don't connect with men who try to weaken them. They connect with men who recognize their strength without feeling threatened by it. And interestingly, one of the most irresistible compliments is the one that feels like a private observation. Something like, "It's interesting. When I listen to you talk, I feel like there's always something between the lines that makes me want to know more." That kind of compliment dissolves her defenses because it suggests depth, mystery, and interest beyond the obvious. It makes her feel complex, intriguing, endlessly layered. And every woman loves to be seen as a universe, not a summary. Machiavellian thinking understood something very few people truly grasp. A compliment isn't meant to inflate her ego. It's meant to awaken her, to activate a dormant emotion, to gently touch a part of her no one has ever reached before. When a compliment makes a woman think, remember, question, or quietly smile to herself, that compliment has already done its work. Each of these phrases doesn't just soften her, it leaves a mark in her mind. It makes her associate you with a different sensation, with a level of attention other men don't offer, with the idea that with you there is more depth, more playfulness, more emotional tension. That's what turns a compliment into influence. Machiavellian thinking understood that a well-crafted compliment doesn't work because of the sentence itself, but because of what it triggers inside the other person. And with a woman, the most powerful thing you can trigger is that mix of surprise and recognition. That feeling of, "I didn't expect you to notice that, but it's true." That's why there's a compliment that touches a very deep nerve. The compliment of her calm. Not her surface calm, but the calm she creates around her. When you say, "There's something about your presence that makes everything feel less chaotic," she doesn't hear shallow praise. She hears that you perceive the invisible effect she has on others, and that affects her deeply, because it confirms a quiet power she feels herself but rarely speaks about. Not everyone has the ability to bring serenity without effort. Not everyone carries an energy that subtly organizes a space. When you recognize that, she feels instant closeness, as if you saw her without filters. Another Machiavellian compliment works through the way she observes. You don't say, "You have beautiful eyes." Everyone says that. You say, "Your eyes don't just look, they analyze." That kind of compliment resonates because it's not aesthetic, it's psychological. It speaks to the depth behind her gaze, her way of understanding people, her perceptive intelligence. A woman always responds when a man notices what goes beyond surface beauty. The compliment of a thinking gaze is powerful because it tells her she doesn't go unnoticed, that her way of seeing the world is distinct, and that you value her not only for what she shows, but for what she intuitively understands. There is a Machiavellian compliment that feels almost forbidden, not because it's physical, but because it reveals too much of her emotional essence. It's when you say, "You have a rare way of being gentle without ever losing your strength." That resonates because it speaks to the most intimate contradiction inside many women, the balance between inner strength and natural softness. Many women feel they must be one or the other. When you acknowledge the coexistence of both, she feels understood on a level that doesn't need explanations. It's a compliment that embraces her full complexity. Machiavellian thinking also understood that some compliments work because they awaken curiosity. You don't say, "I find you interesting." That's flat. You say, "There's something in the way you speak that makes it feel like you don't say everything you think." That compliment is precise. It frames her as layered, nuanced, emotionally intriguing, someone not easily decoded. She responds because it makes her feel sophisticated, unreadable, thoughtfully reserved. And no woman can resist feeling like a compelling unknown. One of the compliments that resonates the most, and one Machiavellian thinking would certainly use, is the compliment of self-control. You don't frame her restraint as something dull. You present it as refined inner discipline. You say, "I'm impressed by how carefully you choose your words, like you already understand their impact." She doesn't hear a casual remark. She hears emotional insight. She knows not everyone notices that level of control, the ability to regulate emotion, to modulate intensity, to shape the emotional tone of a moment. And when she feels you've seen that, something inside her relaxes. There's also the compliment that points directly to her creative mind. It doesn't matter if she draws, writes, works, organizes, or simply imagines. You say, "You have a quiet kind of creativity that shows up even in the smallest details." Many women downplay their creativity because they believe it isn't extraordinary enough to show. When a man recognizes it, even in her everyday gestures, she feels deeply validated. You're not praising something obvious like her looks or her smile. You're recognizing something intimate, something subtle, something real. Another subtle Machiavellian-style compliment touches her social awareness. You don't say she's social, you say she reads the room in a way most people don't. That melts her because, for many women, it's true. They notice silence, tension, mood shifts, unspoken feelings, small changes in energy that others completely miss. And when a man recognizes that ability, she feels an instant sense of connection. It feels like the two of you understand things on the same wavelength, like you notice what others overlook. That feeling of, he sees what I see, creates a quiet bond, a shared understanding that feels rare and meaningful. Machiavellian thinking also understood that a compliment becomes powerful when it sounds balanced instead of exaggerated. When you say, you have a calm way of making an impact, you're praising her without sounding dramatic or overly sweet. You're telling her she influences people, that she leaves an impression, that her presence matters, but she does it quietly. That balance between strength and softness is something many women try to achieve, but very few men actually notice. When a man does notice it, she feels valued without feeling exposed. She feels respected, not put on display. Then there's one of the strongest compliments of all, the one that validates her authenticity. You don't say, you're different. That sounds common. You say, you don't try to impress, and yet you do. That melts her because it touches the core of who she is. It tells her that what makes her attractive isn't effort or performance, but her natural self. It makes her feel enough, valuable, genuine. No woman can resist being appreciated for who she is when she isn't trying to prove anything. Machiavellian thinking understood that these compliments aren't fancy words. They're keys. Keys that open emotional doors. Keys that lower her defenses. Keys that stay in her thoughts. They create a mix of comfort, curiosity, and emotional interest. Because a man who knows how to speak like this doesn't rely on intensity. He connects through emotional accuracy. Many men believe a compliment has to be big, poetic, or dramatic. But that doesn't work on a woman who has heard the same words from everyone. The compliments that truly stay with her are the ones that touch a place she rarely lets anyone reach. That's why there's a final compliment that combines all these ideas into one, the compliment of quiet influence. When you say, it's interesting how your presence changes my mood without you doing anything, that affects her deeply because it doesn't talk about looks or charm. It talks about influence. It tells her she has an effect without trying, that her presence alone matters. And many women feel drawn to the idea that they can have impact without effort, that their energy naturally carries weight. There's also a compliment that works because it breaks expectations. When you say, I like the way you think. Even when she's quiet, she doesn't hear something ordinary. She hears something rare. She understands that even her silence is appreciated. That makes her feel seen beyond words, moods, or behavior. She feels valued in her most natural state without needing to perform. That message is powerful. You don't have to try to get my attention. And few ideas feel more comforting than being appreciated without effort. Machiavellian thinking would also recognize her self-discipline. Something like, you have an inner strength that doesn't need to show off. That's what I respect most. That touches something she built through experience, challenges, and personal growth. It doesn't praise something shallow, it acknowledges her journey. The quiet struggles she faced on her own. When a man recognizes that, she feels both pride and emotional closeness. A door to trust opens naturally. There's also a compliment very few men use because it requires deeper awareness. The compliment of her patience. When you say, the way you wait shows you know your worth. She feels understood. Women are patient in ways that often go unnoticed. They observe, reflect, endure, and choose their timing carefully. When you recognize that patience as self-respect, she feels seen from the inside, not just on the surface. One of the most meaningful compliments touches her intuition. You don't say she's smart, that's basic. You say, your intuition makes it hard to hide the truth from you. She feels that her emotional awareness is valued as a form of intelligence. Intuition is rarely acknowledged openly, and when it is, it creates an instant sense of understanding. Something deep inside her feels recognized. Machiavellian thinking also favors balance, not dependence. Something like, with you, conversation feels natural, not forced. That works because it doesn't place her above you, and it doesn't lower you either. It feels mature and calm. It suggests emotional flow, a connection that feels easy, not heavy. And many women are drawn to interactions that feel natural and light. Another subtle compliment touches how she cares for others. You say, "You have a way of caring that shows, even when you try to hide it." That reaches her most human side, her warmth. She feels seen not only for her strength and mystery, but also for her kindness. Feeling fully seen is deeply meaningful. Then there's the compliment that makes her feel unique without comparison. "I've never met someone with your mix of calm and fire." It's specific, personal, and sincere. She feels recognized for a rare balance, peace and passion existing together. Without saying it directly, you tell her she's one of a kind. Finally, there's the compliment that brings everything together. There's something about you that gives meaning to whatever you touch. That stays with her because it suggests transformation, not just value. It implies her presence adds depth, that she leaves a mark. When a woman feels that her existence matters on that level, something shifts inside her. Used correctly, these compliments don't overwhelm. They connect. They don't flatter. They reveal. They don't exaggerate. They understand. Because real impact isn't in the words themselves. It's in what she feels every time she remembers the man who truly noticed her.